What makes a vampire movie truly unforgettable? Is it the crimson shadows that drip down ancient castle walls, or the silent hunger hidden behind kind eyes? From forgotten art house masterpieces to modern cult thrillers, this list isn't about the ones that sparkle. It's about the 15 vampire movies that truly don't suck at all. So draw the curtains, pour the crimson wine, and prepare for tales of eternal hunger and human despair. Number 15. Martin, 1978. George A. Romero's Martin was no glossy Gothic fantasy. It was a psychological descent into the mind of a boy who believed himself a vampire. There were no capes, no bats, no Transylvanian castles, only a fragile mind haunted by faith and blood. Romero filmed it on a shoestring budget in the decaying suburbs of Pittsburgh, turning ordinary streets into places of paranoia and dread. Martin fed on loneliness. He stalked his victims not out of monstrous power, but delusion. The film was shocking because it stripped away myth and replaced it with the ache of mental illness. Audiences expecting fangs and fog were met with syringes and silence. Some countries banned it, calling it too disturbing for its depiction of addiction and alienation. Behind the scenes, the production was raw. Romero used friends as actors and shot on real locations without permission. Critics didn't know what to call it, vampire movie or psychological horror. Over time, Martin gained a cult following. Its fans say it redefined the vampire as victim rather than villain. Its legacy? A mirror reflecting our fear of ourselves. Number 14. Near Dark, 1987. Before The Lost Boys, there was Near Dark, a fusion of vampire horror and American Western grit. Kathryn Bigelow turned the myth on its head, creating a family of desert-dwelling immortals who fed under moonlit highways and slept in burned-out trailers. It wasn't about castles. It was about survival under an endless sky. The film flopped at release. Studio executives panicked because Bigelow refused to use the word vampire. Marketing failed. Posters looked like generic Western thrillers. But those who saw it never forgot it. The cast included future icons, Bill Paxton as a deranged cowboy predator, and Lance Henriksen as a Civil War relic cursed to wander forever. Production was intense, the desert nights were freezing, and the fake blood ruined costume after costume. Bigelow insisted on practical fire stunts, resulting in terrifyingly real burns and singed eyebrows. In time, Near Dark became legend. It was rediscovered on VHS by horror enthusiasts who saw its brutal poetry. It now stands as one of the few vampire stories that feels genuinely American, lonely lawless, and beautifully doomed. Number 13. Thirst, 2009. From South Korea came Park Chan-wook's Thirst, a film that drank deeply from faith guilt and forbidden hunger. A Catholic priest volunteers for a medical experiment and wakes up undead. His faith collapses, his morals erode, and his desire for life becomes unholy obsession. Audiences were stunned. Thirst wasn't horror. It was a tragic love story painted in sin and blood. Some religious groups protested, accusing the film of blasphemy. Yet its performances burned with sincerity. Song Kang-ho delivered agony and temptation in equal measure. Behind the scenes, Park insisted on emotional realism. The blood was minimal, the silence heavy. Cinematography made every frame look like a Renaissance painting gone rotten. Festivals hailed it as a masterpiece, and Cannes awarded it the jury prize. Thirst lives on as one of the boldest reinventions of the vampire myth. Proof that immortality is not a blessing, but a curse that corrodes the soul. It turned the monster inward and left audiences whispering long after the credits faded. Number 12. Let the Right One In, 2008. From Sweden came a whisper of winter and blood. Let the Right One In was unlike any vampire film before or since. It didn't scream. It murmured. It told the story of Oscar, a bullied boy who finds friendship in Eli, a mysterious child who only appears after dark. Together they drift through frozen courtyards and flickering lamplight, sharing loneliness that feels more human than monstrous. The film was a critical darling, but it terrified producers who didn't know how to sell it. There was no glamour, no Gothic castles, just quiet despair. American distributors doubted audiences would accept a vampire movie spoken in Swedish. For a moment, it nearly vanished into the art house void. Behind the scenes, the production was grueling. Director Thomas Alfredson filmed during sub-zero temperatures in Stockholm suburbs. Real snow, real frost, real breath. The young actors wore thin coats, so their suffering looked genuine. Alfredson refused digital effects, insisting on practical illusions. Bloodstains filmed in real time using hidden pumps and sleight of camera. When released, Let the Right One spread like a dark rumor through festivals and midnight screenings. Critics called it poetry drenched in sorrow. It revived interest in foreign vampire cinema and inspired a Hollywood remake that could never capture its fragile melancholy. Its legacy lives in whispers, reminding us that horror can be tender and terror can be love in disguise. Number 11. The Hunger, 1983. The Hunger was all smoke, velvet, and decay. Directed by Tony Scott in his cinematic debut, it was a fever dream drenched in blue light and synth haze. Catherine Deneuve and David Bowie ruled the screen as immortal lovers feeding not just on blood, but on time itself. The film opened to confusion. Critics called it too stylish, too cold. Some theaters pulled it after a week, claiming audiences didn't understand it. But beneath its surface lay themes of immortality, isolation, and the horror of watching someone you love crumble while you stay unchanged. Behind the scenes, Tony Scott pushed for perfection. The cinematography was drenched in layered mirrors, smoke, and fluorescent shadows. Bowie reportedly adored the aesthetic, but found the makeup process torturous. He spent hours aging in front of cameras, watching himself decay in real time. The film's experimental editing came from Scott's advertising background, giving it a surreal rhythm that confused studios but mesmerized artists. Though dismissed in its day, The Hunger found redemption in the underground scene of the late 80s and 90s. It became a cult icon of style and existential dread, influencing everything from MTV videos to modern vampire storytelling. Today, it stands as proof that the undead can be tragic, beautiful, and painfully human all at once. Number 10. Cronos, 1993. Before he conquered Hollywood, Guillermo del Toro crafted Cronos, a small, intimate horror film about obsession, faith, and eternal life. It wasn't about sharp fangs or black cloaks. It was about an ancient golden device that grants immortality by turning its user into something thirsting for blood. The story followed an aging antiques dealer who accidentally activates the device and slowly succumbs to hunger and decay. Cronos was Del Toro's debut feature made with scraps of funding and pure imagination. It was filmed in Mexico City using real abandoned buildings and dust-filled basements. Censors were nervous. The film's religious imagery, a mechanical scarab feeding on blood inside a crucifix, was seen as sacrilegious. Funding nearly collapsed when church groups protested its symbolism. Yet Del Toro refused to change a single frame. He mortgaged his home to finish the film. On set, the prosthetics were handmade by Del Toro himself, using glue resin and broken watch parts. His crew was tiny, his budget microscopic, but the ambition was endless. When released, Cronos astonished international festivals, winning multiple awards and launching Del Toro's global career. Its influence can be traced through The Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth, where horror meets compassion and monsters carry human hearts. Cronos remains a haunting meditation on mortality, showing that the real curse isn't bloodlust. It's the pain of outliving everyone you love. Number 9. Only Lovers Left Alive, 2013. Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers. Left Alive wasn't about monsters at all. It was about eternity and boredom. Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston played Adam and Eve, two ancient lovers who had seen the world rise and rot 100 times over. They weren't hunting humans, they were surviving the slow death of culture, watching music and art fade into dust. Jarmusch turned the vampire myth inside out. Instead of fear, he offered weariness. Adam lived surrounded by vintage guitars and analog equipment in a crumbling Detroit mansion, composing symphonies for no one. Eve wandered the night streets of Tangier, reading forgotten poetry and remembering civilizations long gone. When they reunited, it wasn't passion, it was relief. Behind the camera, Jarmusch created a world dripping with melancholy. The production faced constant delays due to funding issues and location permits in Morocco. Hiddleston later admitted he nearly lost faith that the film would ever be finished. But once released, critics saw it for what it was, a love letter to culture itself. The movie refused to glamorize immortality. Instead, it portrayed it as a slow decay of everything once meaningful. It was visually hypnotic, scored with haunting underground music and shot through yellow-tinted lenses that made the world look half dead. Audiences didn't know whether to call it a romance, a requiem, or a warning. Today, Only Lovers Left Alive stands as one of the most poetic meditations on immortality ever filmed. It reminds us that living forever means watching everything you love wither away until even blood starts to taste like dust. Number 8. Nosferatu, 1922. The original Nosferatu is where cinematic horror was born. Directed by F.W. Murnau, it was an unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. The studio changed names and locations to avoid lawsuits. Count Dracula became Count Orlok, and London became Bremen. But Stoker's widow sued anyway, demanding every copy be destroyed. She nearly succeeded. Courts ordered the negatives burned. For years, Nosferatu survived only through bootleg reels smuggled across Europe. Those fragments became legend. Murnau's use of shadow and silence turned the creature into pure nightmare. Played by Max Schreck Orlok, looked more like a plague than a person bald rat-like and utterly devoid of empathy. Production rumors spread fast. Some whispered that Schreck was a real vampire hired for authenticity. Others believed the film was cursed. Several cast and crew died mysteriously in the years following its release. The truth was simpler, but no less chilling. Murnau had made a film so convincing it blurred the line between superstition and cinema. Behind-the-scenes filming was dangerous. Lighting rigs overheated, celluloid film ignited, and actors endured nights on freezing mountain sets. Murnau's obsession with realism pushed his crew to exhaustion. Yet the result birthed German Expressionism's greatest masterpiece. Nosferatu's imagery, the shadow creeping up the stairs, the open coffin, the rising sun, became the visual grammar of horror itself. Every vampire film that followed owed it a debt. It's not just history, it's the root of darkness that still haunts our screens. Number 7. What We Do in the Shadows, 2014. When Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement made What We Do in the Shadows, the world didn't expect a vampire comedy to become a phenomenon. Shot in New Zealand with a mockumentary style, the film followed 4 centuries-old vampires sharing a flat and arguing about chores. It turned the Gothic myth into absurd brilliance and somehow made it timeless again. The Baja production was tiny. Most dialogue was improvised. The actors wore their own costumes between takes because the budget barely covered food. Yet what emerged was comedy gold. Ancient immortals dealing with modern annoyances like paying rent nightclubs and cleaning up after victims. Waititi and Clement shot over 100 hours of footage, later editing it down to 90 minutes. The cast often broke character, laughing, forcing retakes that stretched filming for months. Early test audiences adored it, but distributors were skeptical. Studios didn't believe a vampire comedy from New Zealand could sell internationally. They were wrong. The film exploded in popularity after festival screenings, becoming one of the highest-rated horror comedies ever made. It spawned a beloved TV series and inspired countless memes. More importantly, it reminded audiences that even ancient monsters could still be hilarious and oddly relatable. What We Do in the Shadows didn't just make us laugh. It breathed new life into a dying genre. It proved that the undead can evolve, that fear and humor can share the same coffin, and that even eternal darkness can shine, not with glamour, but with irony. Number 6. Interview with the Vampire, 1994. Neil Jordan's Interview with the Vampire was a gothic storm of beauty and grief. Based on Anne Rice's novel, it brought vampires out of the shadows and into tragic humanity. Tom Cruise played Lestat with manic fire, while Brad Pitt's Louis carried the burden of endless guilt. Together, they turned the screen into a cathedral of despair, lit by candlelight and dripping with mortality. The production was cursed from the start. Fans protested Cruise's casting, believing him unfit for the elegant predator. Even Rice herself publicly condemned the choice. But after seeing the finished film, she apologized and praised his performance, calling it one of the most haunting portrayals ever captured. Filming was brutal. Most of it was done at night to preserve pale complexions. Actors endured freezing water-soaked clothes and endless takes under hot lamps. The makeup process took hours each day, with special blood vessels painted beneath translucent foundation. The crew even avoided sunlight between takes to keep the illusion of death alive. Behind the curtain, the atmosphere was tense. Pitt later revealed he suffered depression during production, feeling trapped by the film's darkness. Yet that same melancholy gave the story its heart. The film became a massive hit, earning praise for its tragic grandeur and emotional depth. Today, Interview with the Vampire stands as the bridge between Gothic romance and modern despair. It turned immortality into punishment and proved that monsters could bleed feelings deeper than mortals ever could. Number 5. Shadow of the Vampire, 2000. Shadow of the Vampire dared to ask a question that haunted cinema itself. What if Max Schreck, the actor who played Nosferatu, was truly undead? Willem Dafoe embodied the role with terrifying intensity, while John Malkovich portrayed the obsessive director Murnau. The result was part horror, part satire, and pure nightmare. The film reimagined the making of Nosferatu as a Faustian bargain. Murnau hires a real vampire, promising him victims in exchange for realism on screen. The boundary between performance and death blurs until the final scene, when the crew realizes too late that their art has devoured them. Production was filled with deliberate chaos. Director E. Elias Merhige forced his team to work in shadowed sets, lit only by candle or moonlight, to replicate silent-era eeriness. Dafoe's makeup took 6 hours daily, leaving him nearly immobile. He stayed in character between takes, unnerving everyone who approached. The film's premiere caused shock and admiration. Critics hailed Dafoe's performance as unearthly. He earned an Academy Award nomination for portraying an actor who may not have been human at all. Shadow of the Vampire became a cult masterpiece of meta-horror, reminding viewers that obsession with realism can summon real monsters. Its legacy lingers because it blurs art and madness. It asks what price we pay for authenticity and whether horror ever truly stays on screen once the lights fade. Number 4. Dracula, 1931. Bela Lugosi's Dracula remains the cornerstone of cinematic horror. Before this film, vampires were myths confined to folklore. After it, they became icons. Lugosi's hypnotic stare and sweeping gestures defined the very image of the undead for generations. His accent, his poise, his stillness turned fear into elegance. But the production was anything but elegant. Universal shot 2 versions simultaneously, one in English during the day and another in Spanish at night, using the same sets. The Spanish crew often outperformed the English team, creating a version many historians now call superior. Lugosi earned little for his performance, despite becoming the face of horror. The studio refused to pay him royalties even as Dracula shattered box office records. Behind the scenes, he lived the role wearing his cape offset and greeting crew in character. Some thought it was vanity, Others suspected he couldn't escape the trance. Director Todd Browning battled studio control and censorship boards that demanded cuts for moral decency. Scenes showing blood or biting were removed, yet what remained was more powerful, terror born from silence and suggestion. Dracula changed film history. It created the template for all future horror storytelling and made the vampire not just a monster, but a mirror for desire, power, and loneliness. Lugosi's shadow still stretches across the screen, whispering the eternal line, "I never drink wine." Number 3. Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992. Francis Ford. Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula wasn't just another adaptation. It was a fever dream of love and damnation. The film pulsed with red light and madness where every frame looked like a painting bleeding life and death. Gary Oldman's Dracula was no monster of shadow, but a wounded god cursed by time itself. Coppola insisted on creating every effect in camera. No computers, no shortcuts. The transformations, fogs, and shadows were made with reverse film tricks, mirrors, and handmade models. Crews worked for weeks on illusions lasting seconds. He brought his son Roman Coppola to design practical visual effects that rivaled Hollywood's most expensive digital ones. The studio panicked. Executives feared the film was too theatrical, too emotional. They begged Coppola to add more action, but he refused. He wanted tragedy, not terror. Tension on set was relentless. Keanu Reeves exhausted himself maintaining his British accent, while Winona Ryder endured heavy costumes that tore her shoulders. Oldman's makeup took hours each morning, leaving him nearly unrecognizable. When it premiered, the critics were divided. Some called it overblown, others saw brilliance. Yet time transformed it into one of cinema's most striking interpretations of immortality. Its visual language influenced generations of filmmakers and music videos. Bram Stoker's Dracula remains a delirious symphony of beauty, decay, and love beyond the grave. It dares to show that beneath every monster's curse lies the same ache that drives humanity, the unbearable weight of forever. Number 2. 30 Days of Night, 2007. When 30 Days of Night hit theaters, it shattered every rule of vampire cinema. No romance, no elegance, no mercy. Set in an Alaskan town plunged into a month of darkness, the story unleashed a pack of savage creatures feeding without restraint. These vampires didn't whisper, they screamed. Director David Slade filmed in near-constant cold, using light filters to mimic perpetual twilight. The atmosphere on set was brutal. Actors could see their breath through prosthetics while fake blood froze in place. Josh Hartnett played a sheriff fighting for survival as civilization collapsed around him. The film's vampires spoke their own invented language, created from fragments of ancient dialects. Every screech was recorded using animal roars and reversed audio. The production crew called them pure predators, vampires stripped of glamour, reduced to instinct. Censors in several countries objected to the violence. Slade refused to tone it down, saying true horror meant confronting chaos head-on. Critics were split. Some found it relentless. Others saw brilliance in its simplicity. Over time, the film grew a cult following praise for capturing the primal fear of the dark. 30 Days of Night stands as the opposite of romantic immortality. It's about extinction, about hunger that feels eternal and unstoppable. In its icy silence, it reminds us that the oldest fear is not death. It's survival. Number 1. Nosferatu the Vampire, 1979. Werner Herzog's Nosferatu. The Vampire was not a remake, but a resurrection. He took the bones of the 1922 original and breathed despair into them. Starring Klaus Kinski as Count Dracula and Isabella Gianni as Lucy, the film unfolded like a hallucination. Every frame was cold and sickly beautiful, as if death itself directed it. Herzog and Kinski's relationship on set was legendary for its volatility. Kinski's eruptions terrified the crew. Herzog once claimed he kept a gun nearby in case Kinski lost control. Yet that chaos became art. Kinski's movements were animalistic, his eyes hollow, his stillness unbearable. Filming took place in crumbling European towns that looked untouched by time. Rats were released into real streets to create a sense of plague. Locals protested as thousands of rodents flooded alleys. Herzog didn't apologize. He wanted disease to feel real. The film premiered to stunned silence. Critics didn't know whether it was horror or art. It was both. Nosferatu the Vampire turned the vampire myth into a meditation on death and longing. It showed Dracula not as villain, but as prisoner of eternity, yearning for peace he could never reach. Decades later, the film still feels ancient and prophetic. It whispers that immortality is not a gift, but an infection spreading quietly through the soul. Herzog's vision remains unmatched, a requiem for humanity's hunger for more life when even forever isn't enough. 15 stories, 15 mirrors reflecting our fear of forever. From burning celluloid to frozen tundras, these vampire films remind us that immortality always costs more than it gives. Which one would you face under the pale moonlight? Tell us below then, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more journeys into the night where the monsters still remember being human.